Christianity is one of the most consistently controversial topics in the United States today. And if there's one thing that Christians have gotten incredibly good at, it's building walls. Whether it's social barriers we've created across things like races and cultures and genders, or broader barriers between our churches and their surrounding communities, these relational walls seem to have gone up in every direction, further dividing us and pushing us deeper into our own echo chambers and isolated groups. As more and more people deconstruct the faith and religious frameworks passed down to them by their families, many of us who have decided to stick around are left asking, does Christianity have to be this way? Now, you don't have to be religious at all to want a healthier future for the Christian church. So whether you share a faith background with those of us here on the show, or you're simply a person who wants to see Christians become a more inclusive, more positively involved healing force in the world, you've come to the right place. If you've ever wanted more out of Christianity, if you've ever thought about how much better the world would be if we spent more time building bridges of connections rather than these thicker walls, this show is for you. Bridges Over Walls is an attempt at navigating community relationships in a world that's becoming more and more polarized. It's a chance for us to really zoom in on obstacles going up between church people and their communities and gather new ideas for a healthier, more collaborative future. I'm your host, Kaleb Eisele, and in this episode, we want to give you a quick peek behind the curtain at who's making this show and what we hope to accomplish through it. From our studio here in Gladstone, Oregon, this is Bridges Over Walls. We work for the Oregon Conference of Seventh-day Adventists. Jonathan, what does that mean?
So Oregon Conference is the organizational body of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Oregon and Southwest Washington.
So what does that consist of? You know, you think of a church, people are probably thinking of a building with a steeple that people go to listen to a sermon. When you talk about the Seventh-day Adventist Church, what are you referring to here?
Yeah, so the Seventh-day Adventist Church is a worldwide movement. We have millions and millions of people across the world. But in Oregon, it means that there's 160 or so congregations, communities of people, and our role is actually to support them administratively. So we, in our communication work, we help our 160 congregations succeed in their communication work.
So within communication, you've got kind of several different ways that shows up as work, right? So you've got kind of this internal communication going on between different churches and staff members, pastors, all these different people. You've got public relations. So if Adventism is in the news, or there's a scandal at a church, or there's something where we're showing up in a positive way, we're the people that talk to other reporters, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But then we have a show like this. Where does this fit in with kind of a communication strategy for the Oregon Conference of Seventh-day Adventists?
As a church, we do talk to our own members, but we also have to kind of grapple with where we fit in the bigger society. And it's always this tension of who are we talking to? How do we connect? And I think that a show like Bridges Over Walls like this, it gives us the opportunity to explore where the faith journey really does fit in a bigger society. We can open some doors for Adventists to explore some other ideas and to introduce people to maybe a way of doing church or a way of thinking about the faith journey that is a little different than maybe what they're familiar with or what they would think about.
Now, you and I have some pretty different backgrounds. Both grew up Seventh-day Adventists, but as far as like careers and work life, I'm coming from working for a newspaper in Charleston, South Carolina for a little while, starting some online projects, podcasts, writing things. Your background is in pastoral ministry. So you were the pastor of a local church, and you find yourself as assistant to the president for communications of the Oregon Conference. You are in charge of communication with your team. But what kind of was the draw from one thing to another for you?
I never really had a clear picture of wanting to work for a regional arm of a church. I loved local ministry. I was called and just felt this passion to serve local members and to help reveal the heart of Jesus to them. Like that was my thing, is in ministry, just wanting to be along for the ride with people in their everyday lives and help them catch a glimpse of what a life with Jesus could mean every day. And to be honest, I was not the best conference employee because I didn't feel like I understood what the conference was even there for. I mean, the life of faith should be in local community. I've always felt that way. And so what is this office that administrates things supposed to be doing? I didn't really feel like there was a connection to the local church. And so when I was invited to come to this office, I was a little confused at first, but then I realized something, that there are servants, there are professionals that work in this regional office that are doing really great work on behalf of local churches. And I realized that there was actually a significant communication problem. The separation that I felt wasn't necessarily because the values were different between the locations, but it's because I didn't understand what those values were. So I got invited to the team to say, can you help us reveal the heart of conference ministry to our region? And so that's the heart that I've been able to bring to the work of communication, is just to serve and connect with local communities. In everything we do, we ask the question, how does this help local faith communities work better?
Now, Jonathan, you started this kind of position and era of your life within the past decade.
Yeah.
So tell me, what year did you start, and how have you seen the communication needs and kind of the landscape of what we do and what we're dealing with change just since whatever year you started?
Yeah, so I started in this lane in 2017. So, in that era, it was really print communication. It was a lot of internal communication, connecting directly with churches often, and just barely starting to dip our toe into the idea of digital communication, online video, and social media was significant in the world at large in 2017, but not so much in the church. And so it was really a corporate sort of pursuit in communication. Of course, we all lived through the pandemic, and instantly church communication changed. It became so much more about video and about online engagement and finding ways to engage with people of faith online. And so it really challenged our team to lean further and further into digital communication to make sure that we're meeting the needs of church leaders, to help them reach the audiences they need to, but also in our own right to reach out past the walls of what would have been considered church, to try and to touch and to inspire and enlighten those that maybe we didn't have the same connection to before the pandemic.
Yeah, I remember 2017 is a significant year in my life as well. It's kind of when I was starting to come back. I'd left the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and as I was coming back, I was basically refusing all of the offers to help. So, I started going back to this little local church, rural South Carolina, and they're like, hey, young man, do you want to join our choir? Do you want to be a deacon? Do you want to preach? All these different things. And I would always say no. But at the time, there was this wrestling with media and like, what do we do with communication? Is social media inherently a bad thing? Is it to many people, it was kind of this threatening presence where it was full of temptation and evil and all of this stuff.
And it still is in some way, I suppose.
Absolutely. And so if you were to stereotype Adventism even today, we're late to the party, right?
Definitely.
We're many years behind in certain areas of communication than kind of the general public. But I want to take a minute, where does that leave us when we think about how the rest of the world relates to us, how our neighbors think about us, when we aren't communicating those values that you found when you came here, when we aren't sharing the good, when we aren't using the platforms that other people are using and really contributing to the conversation along with all of our neighbors. Where does that kind of leave us in relating to anyone else.
It puts us at a huge disadvantage. I learned a number of years ago that if there's a gap in communication, the human mind almost intuitively fills that gap with the most negative assumptions it can come up with. And so it means that if we are not engaging in spaces where people are as a community of faith, if we're unknown, it means that people that don't know us are going to, in essence, assume the worst. And I think that good communication and comprehensive communication and staying engaged along the way helps break down those walls so that we can get closer to understanding.
Now, you've lived here in the Pacific Northwest for a lot longer than I have. I relocated, kind of grew up in the Midwest and the South, and came here just in 2019. So I'm still relatively a newcomer to this area. Can you tell us a little bit about like where we are geographically and some of like the tone and culture that, Oregon and Southern Washington kind of bring to the table? Like, what are we working in the midst of?
Oregon is such an interesting place. So we're in Gladstone, Oregon. We're just outside of Portland. Anybody listening to this has heard about Portland and some of the social upheaval that we have experienced in our city over the past few years. If you're looking at the research into what Christianity looks like, this part of Oregon, this part of Southwest Washington is some of the most post-Christian environment that we can find in this country. And so it really is an interesting place to explore ideas of faith because it's just such a place where Christianity isn't necessarily familiar. And in a lot of ways, Christianity has all of the negative assumptions and presuppositions built into it. They look at some of the Christian political stuff that we see in the major political climate, and there is nothing about that is appealing in a large amount of our society right around where we are physically.
When I go back to the East Coast or communicate with other Christians, from other areas, I generally get a couple of different responses, and they're generally negative when I say that I moved to Portland and I love it.
For sure.
One of the responses is like, they kind of view it as this barbaric place because people aren't inherently, Christian, or it's not a given that they have a Christian history or knowledge of the Bible. And they kind of get associated with kind of this, like, I don't know, just lawless, moralless place. But for me, some of the opportunities that have come from people not having that like established background is that you get to start new. So instead of asking like, what kind of Christian are you? Or like, well, how does your belief about this compare with my upbringing and my belief about this? You have people asking like, why believe in God? Mm-hmm. Why does religion matter? And that's a very difficult question for the Seventh-day Adventists to ask because we are connected so broadly, right? We have an established culture when we get here. If we are connected to Adventism, we're bringing something with us. We're bringing a whole group of people, a whole network that we grew up around and still talk to. But it gives us the opportunity to ask these questions ourselves, where it's like, okay, why do I believe in God? Why do I contribute to a religion that I don't always agree with? Why develop work and mission and purpose within this framework when there might be other places that serve certain goals better? And so I think one of the things that's important to me as we do this show comes from an experience I had in the last few years. Here in Gladstone, I'm a local resident. I walk across the street to record this show. We had a couple of different ways that Christians showed up in my town. During kind of the height of, Black Lives Matter and political turmoil and kind of like highly polarized, COVID opinions and things like that, we had some groups that, claimed to be Christian, but were directly violent, that kind of vandalized and harassed a lot of local business owners in my town. And in talking with neighbors, they would reference them as Christians. They would reference them as like this Christian group came and did this, right?
That hurts.
It's horrible.
It hurts.
And you just want to say like, that's not me. That's not what I'm about, right? But taking the time to really hear them out, you begin to see a pattern of kind of hostility from us as a people. And sometimes it's direct, and sometimes it's what you were talking about earlier, where we haven't communicated. And so they have filled the void with whatever references that they have to interpret us. Now, the other way that Christians have shown up is really beautiful. We've got hit with a massive rash of disasters since 2019. COVID was one of them, but I need people to know, in the midst of COVID, we had the height of a civil rights movement. We had a ice storm that knocked people's powers out and power lines down for over a week. And so people were in the midst of winter, trying to figure out how to get out of their driveway and find somewhere to live. And they're like, huddling with their kids in their house, trying to figure out what they can eat from their canned goods. You had a rash of wildfires, right? And in every single one of these events, I saw groups of Christians show up. They're cold too. They don't have power either. They don't know what they're going to eat either. But they showed up for their neighbors and directly went to help alleviate that suffering.
That leads to something else I love about this city, is that there are just so many great-hearted people. There is this sense of wanting to be in community, whether it be people that have no exposure to Christianity, whether it be people who are Christian. There is a sense in this area, and people may not notice that if they look in on Portland on the news or wherever they get their information. But the people here love community and care about community and staying connected. And I think that's something that Christianity at its best has in common directly with this part of the world.
So Oregon culture, some things that I've noticed since moving here, there's kind of this, whether you're, one political leaning or another, there's still kind of this healthy distrust for authority. No matter which side you land on, there is kind of this entrepreneurial, creative spirit here. And it doesn't always show up in media. You'll talk to somebody who's like got a woodworking outfit in their garage, and they're like the more like blue collar type, but they are a creative in their own right. They are entrepreneurial. They are taking ideas and making them a reality. And that is just kind of the patchwork commonality of this area that I've noticed. Talk to me about running an organization in an area where people on all sides inherently are skeptical of organization, right? And even Adventists, our start came from people who were skeptical of organization. There was a time in our history where they didn't want organization. Where are we now?
That's a complicated question, because in an environment of skepticism, words don't matter.
Yes.
I think that organizationally, often we have this instinct that in corporate communication, we need to put out a statement. Something happens, we need to put out a statement about that. In an environment of skepticism, the statements don't matter. The question is, what are you doing in response to whatever is going on? I mean, when there were wildfires happening in our region, and there were hundreds of people in RVs that had nowhere to go, we could have put out a statement as an organization saying, "Oh, we care about all the people that are displaced, and we're going to be praying for them." This organization chose to throw open our gates and use 35 acres of an RV park to house people. And I think that when organizations step up to do something, the words start to matter a bit more because they're tied to something real.
Yeah. I think one of the temptations of anybody coming into a show like this, or anything made by anyone claiming a religion, is to kind of relegate them to a particular stereotype or monolith. Within the Seventh-day Adventist Church, you get certain interpretations of who we are and what we're like. How diverse would you say the umbrella of Adventism is, as somebody who's grown up, lived, worked in this religion? Is there a range of thought, or are we all kind of like similar people?
Man, I like to think about the Seventh-day Adventist movement as a really large tent. And within that large tent, you have people that have a whole range of thoughts and beliefs. There are a small handful of core things that hold us all together. And the main ones end up in our name. As Seventh-day Adventists, we believe that the seventh-day Sabbath is an incredible gift from God that orders the rhythm of our week and our life, and we take joy in it. And that one thing holds us all together. So on a Saturday, anywhere in the world, if you're spending time with Seventh-day Adventist Christians, you're going to have some element of a common experience, something that feels familiar because it's something we cherish together. The other part of the name, Adventist, that means we're looking forward to the coming of Jesus. And in that comes an understanding that Jesus is the one who provides salvation and secures our destiny in the future. And there's this small handful of things we hold in common. But then outside of that, across the spectrum, we have people that sincerely believe a number of different things. And, when I was pastoring in the local church, I can't even count how many times I said this. I said, if you want to be a part of the Seventh-day Adventist movement, there's a place for you in that movement. There are very few things that would cause me to look at somebody and go, sorry, you're out.
Yeah.
Every human on this planet is on a journey. Okay. They're on a journey from, where they came from, where they were born to, if they believe in God, to wherever God is leading them decades from now. And it seems weird to me that I, as a fellow person on this journey, would dictate for you what your journey should look like. If I believe that God is who he says he is, then I'm going to trust that he's got you on the plan that he wants for you. And if you want to claim and be a part of this movement, there's a handful of things to say, hey, are you on this journey with us? Super. Let's go.
As we project forward, I don't want to project too far because as we've learned, predictions, we're going to be wrong, right? Who could have known that we would all be sent home for, 2 years to figure things out? So the future is uncertain. However, as you look at your role and kind of your hopes for the next 5 years or so, what are some things that you would really like to see come to fruition, just with that limited amount of time that you want to work toward?
I hope that in the work that we do on behalf of churches and members and communities, I hope that we're going to demonstrate a spirit of curiosity about the world. I want to see work and art and communication and creativity that demonstrates a curiosity. Jesus said that you're salt, to season the world. And I hope that as a Seventh-day Adventist group, we can be curious about the world that we live in and find creative ways to make a positive difference in the world that we live in. And so for me, that's going to be really important, both to explore creative ways where the church might have something meaningful to say in the community in which we live and serve, but also just to demonstrate curiosity, that to learn something about our neighbors, to learn something about our communities. I think that we'll be better in the process.